No one's ever held my hand before, she said. The rancher just smiled and took it slowly. Sarah had always lived a quiet, simple life. She grew up on a small ranch on the outskirts of town, far away from the noise of city life. Her parents had passed away when she was young, and since then, it had been just her and the land. She had never known anything different. And while she loved the peace and beauty of the countryside, there were times when loneliness crept into her heart. The wind would whistle through the trees. The animals would make their sounds, but there was still something missing, someone to share it with. Each morning, Sarah woke early to feed the animals, check the fences, and make sure everything was in order. Her life was routine, predictable, steady, and quiet. She had grown used to the solitude, but deep down, she longed for something more. The ranch was beautiful, but it could also feel like a prison when she spent so much time on her own. One afternoon, while working in the fields, Sarah noticed a man riding across the open land that bordered her property. His horse moved with a confident stride, and the man appeared calm and focused as he made his way along the dusty trail. Sarah watched him for a moment, unsure of who he was. The small community she lived in was tight-knit, and she was used to seeing familiar faces, but this was someone new. Curiosity tugged at her, and after a while she decided to walk up to the edge of her property to get a closer look. As the man approached, he slowed his horse, lifting his hat in greeting. "Hello there," he said, his voice low but friendly. "Hello," Sarah responded, her voice soft. She wasn't used to talking to strangers, but something about this man felt different. He didn't look like someone who would cause trouble. He seemed like he belonged out here, like her, someone who valued the quiet, the space, and the simple life. "I'm Tom," he said, his eyes kind but guarded. "I've recently moved into the place down the road. I'm getting settled in. Thought I'd come by and introduce myself." Sarah nodded, offering a polite smile. "I'm Sarah. I live here with my animals. It's a quiet place, but it's home." She didn't know why, but she felt a sense of calm when she spoke with him. His presence didn't feel intrusive or overwhelming. It felt right, in a way she couldn't explain. The two exchanged pleasantries, but after a short while, Tom mounted his horse again. "Well, I won't keep you from your work," he said. "I just wanted to say hello." "Thanks for stopping by," Sarah said, watching as he rode away. As she turned back toward the barn, a strange feeling lingered. She wasn't sure why, but something about him had left an impression on her. Over the next few days, Sarah couldn't help but think about Tom. She had spent so much of her life alone that the encounter had been a small but noticeable change. She couldn't quite shake the feeling that perhaps he was someone she would see again, and maybe, just maybe, that wouldn't be such a bad thing. A week later, Sarah was repairing the fence near the edge of her property when she saw Tom again. He was walking toward her, his boots kicking up dust as he approached. This time, he was carrying a bucket of water and a few tools. "Looks like you could use a hand," he said with a small smile, setting the bucket down beside her. "I thought I'd come by and offer my help." Sarah hesitated for a moment, surprised by his kindness. "I can handle it," she said, not wanting to seem weak or needy. She had always been the one to do everything herself, never asking anyone for help. Tom didn't press her. Instead, he simply nodded. "All right, but if you change your mind, I'm right here." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself grateful for his company. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was a kind of quiet that she had grown used to in her life. The kind of quiet that was peaceful, not lonely. Later that evening, after the work was done, Tom walked Sarah back to her house. He carried his tools, and she held the bucket of water, their footsteps in sync as they moved along the dirt path. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow across the fields, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah didn't feel so alone. When they reached her porch, Sarah turned to face him. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "I appreciate the help today." "Of course," Tom replied. "It's always nice to lend a hand when you can." There was a pause, and then he added, "I know how it feels, being alone out here. I've been there myself. It can be hard, but it's nice to know you don't have to be completely on your own. Sarah felt a sudden wave of emotion. She had never really shared her feelings with anyone before, and yet here she was, standing on her porch, speaking with a man she had only just met. But there was something about him, something in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at her, that made her feel as though he understood.
I don't like feeling lonely, Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper.
But I've never really known anyone who could share this life with me. I guess I've gotten used to it. But sometimes it gets hard. Tom nodded, his gaze kind and understanding. It's okay to feel that way. I think we all need someone now and then. Someone to share our lives with, to make the silence a little less heavy. For a moment they stood there, the silence between them comfortable. Tom smiled gently and said, "Well, if you ever need a hand, you know where to find me." Sarah smiled back, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. "I think I might just take you up on that." As Tom walked back to his place, Sarah stood on the porch for a long time, watching the sun disappear behind the horizon. She couldn't help but feel a spark of hope, a tiny flickering flame that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to face this life alone after all. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah found herself seeing Tom more often. He wasn't pushy or intrusive, but somehow their paths kept crossing. They both worked on their respective ranches, but when one of them needed help, they were always there for each other. It wasn't anything grand or dramatic, just small acts of kindness that built up over time. One morning as Sarah was checking on the horses, she noticed that one of them had injured its leg. She wasn't sure what to do. She had dealt with sick animals before, but this seemed different. The horse was limping badly, and Sarah could see that the injury was more serious than she had hoped. She tried to tend to the animal on her own, but the more she worked, the more frustrated she became. She wasn't sure if she could fix it. After what felt like an eternity, she saw Tom's horse approaching from a distance. She was relieved to see him. "I noticed you were out here a while," he said, dismounting from his horse. "You look like you could use a hand." Without saying a word, Sarah stepped aside and motioned for him to take over. Tom didn't ask a single question about the injury. Instead, he knelt beside the horse, examining its leg with careful hands. Sarah watched him work, impressed by how steady and gentle he was with the animal. "You've got a steady hand," she said, unable to keep the admiration out of her voice. Tom glanced up at her, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Comes with experience. I spent a lot of time around animals growing up." As they worked together, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Sarah didn't need to explain herself or her frustrations. Tom simply did what needed to be done. They didn't talk much during the process, but Sarah found comfort in his silence. It was a silence that wasn't awkward, but rather felt like it filled the space between them in a way that words could not. When they were finished, the horse seemed to be in less pain, its leg bandaged up and properly cared for. Tom stood up and wiped his hands on his jeans, his expression calm but satisfied. "She'll be all right," he said, giving the horse a gentle pat on the neck. Sarah felt a weight lift from her chest. She looked at Tom, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't think I could have handled it on my own." Tom nodded, his gaze steady. "That's what neighbors are for." As Sarah stood there, watching Tom gather his things to leave, she realized just how much his presence had come to mean to her. He didn't ask for anything in return, didn't try to make her feel indebted to him. He just helped, quietly and without fuss. It was the kind of kindness that Sarah had always dreamed of, but never thought she'd receive. Over the next few days, they continued to help each other out in small ways. Sarah would bring over fresh bread from her oven for Tom when she had made a batch. Tom would show up just when she needed help fixing a broken fence, or when the weather turned bad, bringing his tools and working alongside her. It wasn't always big things, but each small act added to the growing connection between them. One evening after a long day of work, Sarah found herself sitting outside on the porch, looking out at the rolling hills. The stars had just begun to appear in the sky, and the air was cool and crisp. She had always enjoyed the stillness of the night, but tonight there was something different about it. It was almost as if the silence around her wasn't quite as empty as it used to be. She heard the sound of hooves on the dirt road, and when she looked up she saw Tom riding toward her. He waved as he approached, his smile as warm as ever. "Evening, Sarah!" he called out as he dismounted and tied his horse to the fence. "Evening, Tom!" she replied, smiling back. "What brings you out this way tonight?" Tom shrugged, his hands resting on his hips. "Just thought I'd take a break from the ranch. Thought you might like some company." Sarah felt a flutter in her chest. It was the simple, thoughtful gesture that she had come to appreciate so much. She didn't have to explain why she was alone. Tom just understood. He didn't need to ask, and that made Sarah feel at ease in a way she hadn't felt with anyone before. They sat on the porch together, the night sky stretching out above them. They didn't need to fill the silence with words. There was something comforting about just being in each other's company. Sarah had always been so used to being on her own, but now, sitting beside Tom, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be.
"How's the ranch going?" Sarah asked after a while, breaking the silence.
Tom chuckled softly. "Same as always. Cattle need attention, fences need mending, and the weather always throws a wrench in the works. But I'm getting used to it." "Sounds like you're adjusting well," Sarah said. "I'm glad to hear it." "I'm getting there," he said. "I'm not in a rush. I've got all the time in the world now." They both looked out at the land, the wide open spaces that stretched for miles. There was something about the land that connected them, something they both understood. It was as if the earth beneath their feet had a way of grounding them, of making them feel at peace with the world. For a long time they sat in silence, watching the stars. Neither of them felt the need to fill the quiet with unnecessary words. Sarah realized that this, the peacefulness of the night, the shared understanding between them, was something she had longed for without even knowing it. She had spent so many years hiding behind walls she had built around herself, afraid of letting anyone in. But with Tom, she didn't feel the need to protect herself anymore. There was no rush, no expectation. It was simply two people, sitting side by side, letting the world around them pass by. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "For being here." Tom turned to her, his eyes soft. "You don't have to thank me." "That's just what friends do," Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She hadn't realized how much she needed a friend until now. It wasn't about grand gestures or big promises. It was about the little moments of kindness, the quiet understanding, the comfort of knowing that someone was there when you needed them. The days had become routine for Sarah, filled with early mornings, long hours of work, and the quiet peace of the ranch. But there was something different now. Tom was a constant presence in her life, and with each passing day, Sarah felt herself growing more comfortable in his company. It wasn't just the help he offered with the ranch work, but the way he was there for her in ways that no one had ever been. Tom's kindness was simple, yet it meant more to her than she could explain. He didn't ask for anything in return, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt as if someone truly cared. One evening, as Sarah was tending to the garden, she felt a deep sense of exhaustion that she couldn't shake. It wasn't the physical tiredness of the day. It was something deeper. She had been carrying the weight of her loneliness for so long, always telling herself that she was fine on her own, that she didn't need anyone else. But lately, she had begun to realize just how much she had been holding back, how much she had denied herself the chance to connect with others. She sat down on the bench near the garden, the sun low in the sky, casting a warm glow over everything. The air was still, and the only sounds were the soft rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the peace wash over her. It was then that she heard the familiar sound of hooves on the dirt road. She opened her eyes and saw Tom riding toward her, his steady horse moving calmly across the ground. Tom slowed as he approached, dismounting with his usual ease. He smiled at her, his eyes warm and inviting. "Afternoon, Sarah," he said, his voice soft but full of familiarity. "Afternoon," she replied, managing a smile. She wasn't sure why, but there was something about Tom's presence that always seemed to put her at ease. He wasn't like the other men she'd met. He didn't push her to talk or try to fix things. He simply let her be, offering a quiet understanding that she had never known before. Tom took a seat beside her on the bench, and for a moment, they sat in silence. Sarah could feel the weight of her own thoughts pressing on her, but she didn't want to burden him with her worries. She had always been strong, always independent, but tonight, something inside her felt fragile. She had worked so hard to keep her emotions hidden, to keep herself guarded. But now, with Tom sitting beside her, she felt the walls she had built around herself beginning to crumble. Tom seemed to sense the shift in the air. He didn't say anything at first, but after a while he turned to her, his voice gentle. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Is everything all right?" Sarah hesitated, unsure of how to answer. She had always prided herself on being self-reliant, never asking for help, never showing weakness. But in that moment, sitting next to Tom, she realized how much she had kept locked away. She had spent so many years burying her feelings, afraid to be vulnerable. But now, for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel so afraid. "I don't know," Sarah said quietly, her voice fairly above a whisper. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I'm not sure what to do with everything inside me." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment she wondered if she had said too much. But Tom didn't look surprised or uncomfortable. Instead, he nodded slowly, his expression soft and understanding. "It's okay to feel that way," Tom said, his voice reassuring. "You don't have to carry everything on your own." Sarah swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She had never let anyone see this side of her before. She had always been so careful to keep her feelings hidden, but with Tom, it felt different. She could feel the weight of the years she had spent alone, the loneliness that had built up over time, and for the first time, she felt safe enough to acknowledge it. "I've always tried to do everything on my own," Sarah admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've convinced myself that I don't need anyone, that I'm better off alone. But sometimes it's too much, and I don't know what to do with all of it." Tom's gaze was steady as he listened to her, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "You don't have to do it all alone," he said softly. "It's okay to need someone. It's okay to let others in." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat, and for a moment she wasn't sure if she could say any more. But there was something about Tom's presence that made her feel like she wasn't being judged, like she didn't have to be strong all the time. He wasn't trying to fix her problems or offer solutions. He was just there, listening. "I'm scared," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Scared that if I let someone in, I'll just get hurt again. I've been hurt before, and I don't know if I can go through that again." Tom didn't say anything at first. Instead, he reached over, his hand resting gently on hers. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Sarah looked at him, her heart racing in her chest. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, but somehow it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like the beginning of something new. "I can't promise that everything will be easy," Tom said quietly, "but I can promise that you don't have to go through it alone. I'm here, Sarah, and I'm not going anywhere." Sarah's heart fluttered in her chest, and for the first time in a long time she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face everything by herself. She had spent so many years closing herself off from the world, afraid to let anyone get too close. But now, sitting beside Tom, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe it was okay to be vulnerable, to let someone in. Maybe, for the first time, she didn't have to hide. As they sat together, the world around them felt quieter somehow, as if time had slowed down just for them. The sun had set, and the stars were beginning to twinkle in the sky. It was a peaceful moment, one that Sarah would hold on to for a long time. She didn't know what the future held, but for now, she didn't feel so alone. For now, she had someone by her side who understood her, who didn't need her to be anything other than herself. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she could breathe again. The days after their conversation on the porch felt different for Sarah. She could no longer ignore the connection that was growing between her and Tom. It wasn't something loud or obvious. It was quiet, like the steady rhythm of the wind in the trees or the soft rustling of the grass. But it was there, and Sarah couldn't deny it any longer. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Tom found themselves spending more time together. It wasn't planned, but it seemed natural. The work on the ranch never stopped, and sometimes the tasks felt endless, but they had each other to rely on. Tom would stop by in the mornings, sometimes just to help with the cattle or to fix a fence. Sarah noticed that she looked forward to his visits more and more, not because of the work itself, but because of his company. His calm presence brought a sense of peace that she hadn't known she was missing. One day, after a long afternoon of tending to the fields, Sarah was cleaning up the barn when she heard a knock on the door. She turned and saw Tom standing in the doorway holding a small basket. The sun was setting behind him, casting a golden glow over everything. For a moment, Sarah just stood there, taking in the sight of him. "Evening," he said, his voice warm. "Evening, Tom," she replied, surprised by the rush of warmth she felt when she saw him.
"I brought you something," he said, holding out the basket. Sarah raised an eyebrow, curious.
"What's this?" "Fresh bread," he said with a smile. "I thought you might like some." Sarah's heart warmed at the gesture. It was simple, but it meant so much. "You didn't have to," she said, feeling a little shy.
"I know," he replied, stepping closer and handing her the basket.
"But I wanted to." Their fingers brushed as she took the basket, and for a moment neither of them moved. It was a small thing, but it sent a rush of electricity through Sarah's chest. She quickly looked down at the basket in her hands, trying to hide the way her heart was racing. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I really appreciate this." Tom smiled, a small but genuine smile that made Sarah's heart flutter. "No problem. I thought we could sit out on the porch and have some together if you're not too busy." Sarah glanced at the barn, then back at Tom. It was tempting to keep working, to bury herself in tasks that needed doing. But there was something about sitting with Tom, sharing a quiet moment together, that made her feel lighter. "I'd like that," she said softly, a smile tugging at her lips. They sat together on the porch, the soft sound of crickets filling the air. Tom took a seat on the wooden steps, and Sarah sat next to him. The basket of bread sat between them, and they both reached for a piece. There was a comfort in the simplicity of the moment. No words needed, just the quiet companionship of two people who had found something special in each other. As they ate, Sarah found herself stealing glances at Tom. There was something about him that made her feel at ease, like she didn't have to be anyone other than herself. His easy smile, the way he spoke without rushing, the way he looked at her as though she was the most important person in the world. It was all so different from what she had known. For the first time, Sarah wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. She wasn't afraid of what could happen if she let someone into her heart. Tom looked over at her, catching her gaze. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes, but no pressure, no expectation. It was as if he was waiting for Sarah to make the first move, to let him know how she was feeling. For so long, Sarah had kept her emotions buried, afraid of being hurt. But now, sitting beside him, she realized that maybe it was time to let go of her fears.
"You've been different lately," Tom said after a long pause, his voice gentle. "I can see it."
"You're not hiding so much anymore." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding back, how much of herself she had kept hidden from the world. But with Tom it felt different. She didn't feel the need to protect herself all the time.
"I guess I've been trying to figure things out," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "For a long time I thought I was better off on my own."
But now I'm not so sure." Tom nodded, his eyes never leaving hers.
"It's okay to not have all the answers," he said. "You don't have to know everything right now."
You don't have to carry all that weight by yourself. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt like someone truly understood her, like someone cared about the parts of her she had always kept hidden. She looked at Tom, her heart beating faster, and for a moment she felt a sense of peace she had never known before. "Tom," she said quietly, her voice trembling just a little.
"I've been scared of getting close to someone."
scared of what it might mean. Tom reached over and gently took her hand in his. The touch was so simple, yet it felt like everything. "You don't have to be scared with me," he said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." A wave of emotion washed over Sarah, and she felt tears welling in her eyes. She quickly blinked them away, but the warmth in her chest remained. For the first time, she allowed herself to let go of the wall she had built around her heart. David stopped it. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't instant, but she felt something shift inside her. She wasn't alone anymore. She didn't have to face the world by herself. As the evening stretched on, they talked about everything and nothing. They shared stories from their past, talked about their hopes for the future, and laughed over small, silly things. There was no rush, no urgency. They were just two people, sitting on a porch enjoying each other's company. When it was time to say goodnight, Sarah stood up, feeling a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. Tom followed her to the door, and before she could think, she reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you, Tom," she said, her voice steady now, "for being here, for being patient with me." Tom smiled, his eyes full of warmth. "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "I'm just happy to be here with you." As Sarah closed the door behind her, she leaned against it, her heart racing. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she wasn't afraid of it. With Tom by her side, she felt ready to take the next step, whatever that might be. The days following that evening felt like they belonged to a different chapter of Sarah's life. Something had shifted between her and Tom, a quiet but powerful change that neither of them spoke about directly. They continued their daily routines, working together, sharing meals, and sitting on the porch in the evenings. But now there was something deeper, something unspoken that filled the spaces between their words. Sarah found herself waking up each morning with a sense of anticipation. It wasn't just the work on the ranch. It was the thought of seeing Tom, of spending time together, of feeling that quiet connection that seemed to grow stronger every day. She hadn't realized how much she had longed for companionship, for someone who understood her without needing to say much. But with Tom, it felt easy. There was no pressure, no rush, just two people letting time unfold as it would. One evening after they had spent the day working together, Sarah felt a shift in the air as they walked back to the house. The sun had just set, leaving the sky painted in shades of orange and purple, and the evening was cool but comfortable. Tom had offered to help her finish a few last tasks for the day, and now, as they stood in the yard, Sarah felt an odd mix of nerves and excitement. She didn't know why, but tonight felt different. The way Tom was looking at her, his gaze steady, his expression calm, made her heart flutter. It wasn't something new, but tonight it seemed to stand out. She had been feeling something building between them, a quiet affection that had blossomed without either of them forcing it. And yet, now that it was there, Sarah couldn't ignore the way her chest tightened when she thought about what it might mean. Tom took a deep breath, glancing out toward the horizon before looking back at Sarah. "It's a beautiful evening," he said softly. "Yeah," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It really is." They stood there for a moment, side by side, neither one of them speaking, but both feeling the weight of what had been unsaid for weeks now. Sarah could feel her pulse quicken, her thoughts running in circles as she tried to find the right words, the right way to say what she had been thinking for so long. "Tom," she began, her voice shaking just a little, "there's something I need to say." Tom turned to her, his expression open, patient, as if he had been waiting for her to say something. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest.
I've never had anyone hold my hand before," she said, her words coming out in a rush.
She felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but there was no going back now. Not like this. Not with someone who makes me feel safe. Tom's eyes softened as he listened, and Sarah could see the warmth in his gaze. He didn't look surprised, but there was something in his expression that made her feel understood, as if he had known all along, but had waited for her to say it. "You don't have to be scared, Sarah," Tom said gently, his voice soothing, like the calm of the night around them. It's okay.
You don't have to rush into anything. I'm not going anywhere.
I'm here for you, in whatever way you need. Sarah's chest tightened again, but this time, it wasn't out of fear. It was out of something else, something she had been too afraid to feel for so long. Hope. Hope that maybe she wasn't alone anymore, that maybe she could let herself trust again. She looked at Tom, her heart opening up in a way she hadn't allowed it to in years. I think I'm ready, she said, her voice soft but steady. Ready to stop hiding, to stop being afraid. To let someone in. Tom reached out then, his hand moving slowly towards hers. There was no rush in his movement, no force. It was simply an invitation, a silent promise that he was there, waiting for her. Sarah felt her breath catch as she looked at his hand, and for a moment she was paralyzed by the sheer weight of the moment. But then slowly she took a step forward. Her hand, trembling just slightly, found his. And as their fingers touched, something inside her shifted. It wasn't a dramatic moment, but to Sarah, it felt like the beginning of everything. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, telling herself she didn't need anyone, that she was fine on her own. But now, with Tom, she realized how wrong she had been. She had been pushing away the very thing that she needed, the connection, the companionship, the love. Tom didn't squeeze her hand or pull her closer. He simply held it, gently, with all the care and respect that Sarah needed in that moment. They stood there, their hands entwined, the world around them quiet and still. The only sound was the soft rustling of the wind, the distant calls of animals, and the steady beating of Sarah's heart. I've never held anyone's hand like this before, Sarah whispered, almost to herself, as if the words were more for her own understanding than for Tom. Not like this, not with someone who feels right. Tom smiled, a small but genuine smile that made Sarah's heart swell. I'm glad it's me, he said softly. The weight of his words hit Sarah harder than she expected. For so long she had been afraid of what it would mean to open up to someone, to let someone in. But now, standing beside Tom holding his hand for the first time, she felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. This was what she had been missing all along. This was what it felt like to truly connect with another person. They stood together for a long while, just holding hands, the world around them fading into the background. Sarah didn't know where their future would lead, but in that moment she didn't need to know. For the first time in her life she felt as though she had found someone she could trust, someone who wouldn't rush her or force her to be anything other than herself. Tom was the calm she had needed all along, and now that she had let him in, she felt ready to face whatever came next.
As the night grew darker, Tom squeezed her hand gently.
You're not alone, Sarah. Not anymore.